Hello, Llewellyn King here for MECFS Alert. I'm out in Incline Village, Nevada, at the Cimarron Clinic, which is where Dr. Daniel Peterson practices in the area of chronic fatigue syndrome. He's an icon in that field. He's one of the leading physicians, and his research assistant, Gunnar Gottschalk. What do you do for Dr. Peterson?
You know, essentially for Dr. Peterson, I do what we call the nuts and bolts of completing these clinical research trials. We have to intake patients and controls. We have to make sure that they meet all the criteria that's laid out in the protocol. And then we also have to do the sample collection. And there's various challenges throughout all this.
And you're trained as an emergency room technician?
Yes. Before this, I worked as an EMT. So this is my, that was my first clinical experience. This has been something completely different when you're dealing with a chronic illness versus...
So here you really have two separate jobs. One is to go through records, and the records here go back a very long way, don't they?
Sure. I mean, a major part of one of the projects that's being funded by the Chronic Fatigue Initiative out of New York City, about 90% of the work actually is going through the charts themselves. And in some cases, Dr. Peterson is following these individuals for the past 25, 30 years, 25 years since the initial outbreak here in Incline Village. We have upwards of 10 volumes of charts, so
He also, like I understand, has bodily samples, blood and...
oh, yes.
All the other samples that you take, all the other samples.
Sure, and in our freezer, actually just down the hall here, we have over 5,000 serum samples and about 450 cerebral spinal fluid samples. Dr. Peterson is, has been... he's really good at doing lumbar punctures. That's what he does. We do it to rule out in the very off chance that someone has something like a parvovirus 19, something that we can potentially cure or treat. Because we're a tertiary care center. Patients have gone to many, many physicians before they reach us, and Dr. Peterson takes on these very sort of special cases. In our freezer, we also have all sorts of other bodily components that range from date. I mean, just a couple weeks ago we were going through the freezer itself, and I was born in 1986, and looking at the dates when these were taken, oh, this was 2 years before I was born. So it's very cool, it's very interesting, and we get the...
What do we learn from these old samples? Do we create an arc of the patient's life, or...?
I think what we're going to be doing is, on the basis of translational research, what we are trying to accomplish here is matching what we see here in the clinic, blood samples, whatever they may be, spinal fluid samples, to the actual charts, to the actual histories of the patients. For Cimarron research, what we really specialize in are these small pilot studies. We provide initial data for larger R21s, R01s, which can be funded by much more substantial institutions.
You're a young man, 25.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get to Incline Village? It's not on the major thoroughfare of medicine.
It's definitely not. I was recruited to ski race at Sierra Nevada College right here in Incline, and Dr. Peterson, he was the ski team physician. He did our VO2 max testing, and
what is VO2 max testing?
It's looking at the amount of oxygen that you're actually using. For athletes, it's really important. It tells you,
race
kind of where you need
horses
to train.
too.
Sure. Yes.
And this is how you came into. You were skeptical at first about CFS.
I hadn't met any patients. Working in the ER definitely changes your perspective on things. I think in a lot of ways in the emergency room you have about 3 options. You can get admitted, you can go home, or you can die. Here in the world of chronic fatigue syndrome, with everything that I had heard about sort of peripherally from the XMRV and the Whittemore-Peterson Institute, I was somewhat saying, this is a little bit strange. Even my parents were asking, what are you doing for work? I think now that I know the patients and I've seen this, you can tell when people are sick, and these people are incredibly sick, and it's something that needs to happen. I mean, chronic fatigue syndrome affects about 400 in every 100,000 individuals in the United States. It's something that needs more funding. It's something that we're going to figure out. And
you're going to go to medical school yourself?
Yep.
And you will be one of the few young doctors who knows something about CFS, or myalgic encephalomyelitis, if you prefer the old name.
Sure. I mean, I think that, you know, what we're also doing with these protocols when we're establishing these research projects, they are a way in which physicians will hopefully be able to standardize the diagnosis process. You know, in a lot of ways, when you're diagnosing chronic fatigue syndrome, you're knocking out just about every other disorder that could be until you finally reach myalgic encephalomyelitis.
Is that the so-called wastebasket diagnosis?
That's one way in which it happens, and unfortunately, when individuals go to their general practitioner, they don't necessarily do the correct lab panels, the immunological panels, the virological panels. These are something that, you know, not only does Dr. Peterson do, and like I said, every once in a while we get really lucky, and we find someone who doesn't have chronic fatigue syndrome, who has a whole different deal.
Treatable. And
it's treatable. But that's, you know, in my experience here, that's about 5% of the time, and that's not good enough. And I can tell you that, you know, Dr. Peterson, he's an individual that will go to the ends of the earth, if you want to say that, to figure this thing out. And I think that's going to be his legacy in medicine, and that's why I feel so lucky to be around an individual who questions, who doesn't just say, "Sorry, you're sick, you're chronically ill." You know, he's going to figure it out, and that's where we are.
I hope you have great success in your career.
Oh, thank you so
much.
much.
And that this thing is figured out in your lifetime.
Oh, I hope so too.
Cheers.
Cheers.
If you would like to sponsor MECFS Alert, please contact us at mecfsalert@gmail.com. Help us to help you.